Adventures in Mortuary Archaeology and Commemoration. It's Archaeodeath.
So my part in this project actually began something like 12 years ago when I was at that point programme lead for history with archaeology at Canterbury Christchurch, and was able to give a job to a young archaeologist called Andy Seaman. It was his first post outside Cardiff, and we sat down when he arrived and we thought, oh God, we can do some really good stuff together here. I work on Limited Frontiers and his own work as a PhD student. And I then promptly left Canterbury and moved to Manchester. So we kept in touch over the years, hatching these projects. The first one of these, the Offa site Collaboratory, is back in 17. We said, no, we need to get this off the ground. Finally, 5 years after that, Andy moved to Cardiff. The mothership called him home. And I think he'd been at Cardiff for about a month. And I get an email saying, oh, right, Charlie, we're on. So we sat down with Keith, who was our senior research fellow, and hatched this project for the Leverhulme Trust. So what do we want to do? We both have an interest in, Andy from the material culture side, myself from the kind of historical record side, the sources side, the kind of how do frontier spaces operate? What makes a frontier space? How is it articulated? And how does it develop across time and indeed space? Now, the interesting thing for us about thinking about the March is that its legal and institutional formalisation occurs in the centuries after the Norman Conquest. That's when we talk about the March as a kind of legal, political entity. But that formalisation is, I would argue, at the end of a process of development that takes place across the previous 5, 6, 7 centuries. So a formalisation of a whole series of social, cultural, political practices. Despite this, much of the historiography that deals with the March focuses only on the frontier as it appears in the 12th century. I think of work by the late Rhys Davies, Max Lieberman, Fred Supert and others. So we, Andy and I and Keith, put together this multidisciplinary 3-year project, and we pitched it to Leverhulme Trust, who gave us the money. We got the money, or we got confirmation that we got funding last year, and the project started in earnest in January this year. So,
press the cursor.
So what am I going to do in the next sort of 15-20 minutes or so? Talk about our research aim, talk about our objectives, they're different, and the how. How are we going to do this? And then some of the sort of initial results. We're still very much in the early days of the project. It's been going 3 months, 4 months. Not all the stuff are in post yet, but more of that anon. So, what's our research aim? Twofold: to transform the understanding of the frontier during the early medieval period, so roughly defined as circa 400 to 1100, and then place it within its wider European and perhaps even global context. So how we approach what becomes the Anglo-Welsh frontier, does that offer us ways of thinking about other frontier spaces? And indeed, does the way that other historians and archaeologists have approached frontier spaces, let's say in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, have implications for how we might want to do this? So it's a two-way process. Now, critically, this means not obsessing about the Dyke, or the Dyke. I know that sounds heretical in this context, but looking at the frontier zone, either side of the linear earthworks that mark, we now think of as marking the Anglo-Welsh frontier. So, that was our big research aim, to really provide a new understanding of the frontier as a kind of particular sort of space, physical, cultural, etc. So, the objectives, breaking that down. So, determine the origin and evolution of the frontier zone. So, how was that frontier landscape created, contested, articulated, and maintained? To identify and characterise places of power, so secular sites, sites of major churches, and as far as we can, reconstruct how they operated in the frontier space. Identify and characterise assembly landscapes, so places of communal gathering that were central to governance and community action, and again determine their relationship to the evolution of the frontier over time. Elucidate the origins and development of the distinct social and political institutions of the frontier, including territorial and ecclesiastical organisation, legal structures and their relationship to centres of authority. I suppose part of our problem here, or part of the problems that we have to kind of engage with in terms of the structure of this project is we're dealing with a space that is now split between two jurisdictions, England and Wales, and is therefore seen as peripheral to both. Whereas actually what we're trying to conceptualise is the frontier almost as its own centre, looking outwards. And how does that change, or how does that transform how we understand it? How does that transform what we think of as these centres of power within the frontier? And then place the archaeological evidence in dialogue with the historical sources. And this is, I guess, primarily an archaeology project. The PI is an archaeologist. The bulk of the funding is via towards the archaeology work packages. But it is about putting those two sides together and then locate it within a comparative discussion of European frontier landscapes. So I think when Pauline was talking earlier, and I should also say I've got the 100-day cough as well, it's miserable, isn't it? It's bloody miserable. You were talking about the Scandinavian material artefacts you're finding along the frontier. I'm thinking, I mean, Domesday in Shropshire, there's a thing called Summerlead, which is a Scandinavian personal name, meaning summer traveller. And there's another thing called Lagman, which is law speaker. So, you've got not just material culture that is suggestive of, I guess, probably Hiberno-Norse, but also people who are depositing that material culture. So there's some nice synthesis there. And I suppose wrapping all this up is how was the frontier zone created? The frontier is both a physical but also conceptual entity. So I'm thinking here, in particular, for instance, the work of Andy Brady, who wrote a book about 5-6 years ago on the Anglo-Welsh frontier. How do people imagine that frontier space? We can think about the materialities of it. We can think about the landscape of it. But also, how was it conceptualised by contemporaries? And what are the processes that created it? Force, violence, contestation, or processes of negotiation and compromise? And it's not an or, is it? Let's be realistic. It's not an or. It's all of those things and probably more. But also, I think contestation and how that frontier is contested remains an important part of what we're wanting to do. So, how is the project structured? So we have a project advisory board, a mixture of historians and archaeologists, both archaeologists within university departments and the archaeologists within the wider archaeology community, within archaeology units. The PI is Andy. I guess Andy's work is known to most of you in the room, so I don't really need to talk about Andy. that's me. We have a senior research fellow, Keith, who we'll be talking soon. We've got 2 postdoctoral research associates, an archaeology research associate who is in post already, Dr Marion Shiner, who's based at Cardiff. The history postdoc will be going live very shortly, so if you're aware of any recently completed PhD students in early medieval history, expertise in frontier landscapes, please alert them to that. And then we have a PhD student at Cardiff, Joanne McCarthy, who is looking in particular at assembly sites. So the key point about this really is to synthesise and to bring together a variety of discipline approaches. History, landscape history, archaeology, and even literature. So, how is the project actually structured? What are we doing with that £500,000 from the Leverhulme, other than having nice lunches? So there are 4 main work packages. And I'll talk about critical localities in just a moment. So the first work package is the desktop-based analysis of our 5 selected critical location, critical localities. That we're now in that process now, so that's what Marion Shiner's been doing since she started. In year 2, we moved to work package 2, which is the site level analysis of our selected critical localities within our critical landscapes. Work package 3 is, if you like, the PhD package. So this is the assembly places and their associated landscapes. That's Johan's piece of it. And then work package 4, which is the history, PDRA, and I guess my particular part of the project, which is the origins and development of the kind of social, cultural, and political institutions around the frontier. How are we going to put that work out there? The core of this is going to be in a co-authored, multi-authored monograph. But also I think we've been talking about a special issue of the Offa Dyke Journal, and also articles in a wider range of popular archaeology periodicals. And there may be other things we do as well. I suspect there'll be a lot of talking to local groups, a lot of working with volunteer groups that will also be, I think, to my mind, will be important outputs of this project. We can do a nice research project with a nice monograph, but it's also about transforming and reaching out to everyone's understanding of the frontier landscape in which, for instance, the dykes are located. So, critical landscapes. The big thing we wrestled with to start with was how the hell do we try and design a project that covers, the frontier, which is, as the map that Pauline was showing earlier, is quite a big space, or could be conceived as quite a big space. How do we approach that? And really I've got a nod here to Andy and Keith in terms of thinking about how the idea of critical localities. So these are places that we feel that from the evidence we've got already can be reasonably argued to have had a significant role, significant importance on the frontier, and that have been contested at various times across the period. So these are locations that might have included surveillance, movement, etc. So places that we think where frontier relationships become especially into sharp focus. So we picked on so we identified 5 locations that we felt encapsulated these ideas around movement, around surveillance, around contestation, around kind of also critical mass of sites, critical mass of information. So step 1 is a kind of macro scale analysis of the critical landscapes. So these are areas where, and to quote the proposal, where topography and cultural inheritance coalesce to produce specific strategic potentials within the frontier. So east to west routes across the frontier. The one that I'm particularly excited by, probably not the same as Keith, is this one here. Sort of between the 7 and the D, the 7D interlude in the sort of Welsh Pool area. I don't know why that excites me, but it does. So having identified the kind of broader landscapes, it's identifying particular places within these localities for further investigation. So the 5 we've picked on: the Lower Wye Valley near Chepstow, the Middle Wye west of Hereford, the Clun Valley in the area around Newcastle upon Clun, the Middle Severn near Welsh Pool, and the Alyn Valley near Mull, so not very far from here at all. So those, as far as the kind of archaeology side of the project is concerned, are the kind of core study areas that we hope will allow us to kind of see how this frontier space operates, how it's constructed, how relationships are articulated. So where are we at the moment? This is really Marian's current part of the project, the desk-based assessment. So she's been working on, in particular, the Clun Valley Critical Landscape 3. So that's kind of covering all of this material: HCR data, past data, LiDAR data, historic mapping, satellite imagery. Marianne's been doing this now for 3 months? About 3 months? 3 months. 3 months. So within each CLA, Marianne's using these various data sources to produce a baseline characterisation of each area. So arc resource, polygons, and then we move from there into phase 2 of the project later this year, and then into year 2 of the project.
Excuse me, so what is LiDAR data, please?
Oh, right. I'm going to look at Keith. Because you can explain it far better than I can.
I think after the last presentation I should refer to Tim.
Please, thank you, Pete.
Well, mine isn't very clear. It's a means of using projected data from satellites that gives you basically bounces back and gives you very accurate points in the landscape. The reason that archaeologists are so excited by it is that you're able to strip your tree cover and things like that off, so you can see earthwork monuments that otherwise you couldn't see.
Thank you.
It's not basically the resistivity and density. What was I going to say? I think that's probably it from my side of things. So that is all, folks. But questions.
Follow ArchaeoDeath on WordPress, or you'll never learn.